I really appreciate this opportunity. And today I want to visit with you all about work that we're doing in what we call in Tulsa, Kirkpatrick Heights and Greenwood area. The Greenwood area has received a lot of national attention, I'd say, over the last 5 years. It is the site of arguably the worst incident of racial violence in any city in American history, the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Prior to that event in May of 1921, this area was known as Black Wall Street, possibly the most vibrant African-American economy in the United States. And on one evening in May of 1921, a white mob burned it to the ground. And that has all, you've seen The Watchmen, you've seen a dramatic recreation of that. There was little to no historical work done around this or news coverage of it for about 75, 80 years after it happened. And one of the important things that did happen after the event itself was that it was rebuilt. The leaders in Greenwood rebuilt the site, a great deal of it, and then urban renewal came through in the 1960s and 70s and really did another round on it. An interstate highway was built right through the middle of it. And so this is an area that has had repeated damage done to it by governmental intervention over the last century. And so one of the things that we found when I came in as mayor, I ran for mayor on a platform of addressing the racial disparities that exist between this part of our city and the rest of Tulsa. Kids that are growing up in this part of our city are expected to live 11 years less than kids elsewhere in the city. And in the Greenwood and Kirkpatrick Heights area, there was Oklahoma State University built a campus there, and then much of the urban renewal land was just sitting there vacant. In fact, if you go there today, you can still see steps leading up to houses that once stood there and are no longer there. And so we decided we wanted to pull this out of urban renewal and present it and ask the community to lead the process around envisioning what could happen there. And then we would bring the tools and resources of the city government to empower them to fulfill their vision and their dream for this area. So what I'm going to talk with you about today is actually still ongoing. When we're talking about the RFP process, what we'll go through today is everything that we have done leading up to the RFP process. We haven't even issued the RFP on this site yet, because what we've seen is the technical work, just nuts and bolts planning is fairly straightforward. The challenge on this site, which is, in my opinion, both from a place standpoint and from for lack of maybe a better term, a spiritual standpoint for our community, this is the most important piece of land in the entire city of Tulsa. And so doing this the right way means engaging the community on the front end to make sure that we are moving forward in accordance with what they want to see here, rather than the city coming in and from a heavy-handed standpoint, just dictating what's going to be. So we've prioritized that community-led process, and that led us to this presentation that I'm going to walk you through today. Is actually the presentation that we have used for our community engagement around the development of this master planning process. So if we could move forward. You go one more slide, please. There we go. So we engaged in a 12-month process for the community to develop this vision. What you see in this aerial overhead right here is from the north looking to the south. The area is immediately outside of downtown Tulsa. You can see the highway networks are what are in pink on that map. And you can see Greenwood identified. You can see the campus for Oklahoma State University's campus here in Tulsa. And then you'll see just a bit to your right there, a whole bunch of green space. And that is the Kirkpatrick Heights area that used to be a neighborhood up until the 1960s and 70s and is to this day just a bare open field. So one of the questions we had from a lot of folks is, why do a plan? Why don't you just go ahead and get to work? If we can go to the next slide, please. So what we wanted folks to understand is that this is an opportunity to leverage 56 acres of land that the citizens of Tulsa own. This is not privately owned land. It's owned by the citizens, and it's an area, it's in a neighborhood that historically has a lack of housing options. And people have had, the folks who live in this part of our city have had few options to influence what would happen in their part of our city. We wanted to change that. We believe that it's an opportunity for equitable economic growth and local ownership of what happens there. It's also a physically divided community. As I mentioned a moment ago, interstate highway built there, divided this part of our city off from downtown Tulsa. It is also growing and changing very quickly in this part of our city. Downtown Tulsa has seen over $1 billion of investment in the last decade. North Tulsa, in the time that I've been mayor, we've attracted over $1 billion of private investment in that area. So it's growing very quickly. We also have natural disaster issues around flooding and others. And then as you see there, we've had just a history, and I mentioned a moment ago, the history of disinvestment and displacement. There's poor connectivity and walkability. There's a lack of retail and entertainment amenities, not just in this part of our city, but in all of North Tulsa. And so for all of these reasons, we wanted this community-led process. 2 slides, please. So leading this effort is a team that is called Partner Tulsa. And a few years ago as mayor, I took 6 different old legacy city economic development authorities. So our parking authority, our urban renewal authority, our economic development authority, and others, and merged them all into one new authority, the purpose of which is to use economic development to create equality of opportunity. That is why it exists. It does not exist so that whoever's the mayor gets to cut ribbons and be in the newspaper for jobs coming to town. The purpose of this organization and all our economic development work moving forward as a city is around equality of opportunity. And so the team that led this process, it was paired both in my office with my deputy chief of staff, and then the leadership team from Partner Tulsa. The next slide, please. Outside of our organization at the city, we paired and combined really top level national consultants and paired them with people who have long standing, committed, demonstrated excellence when it comes to community outreach in our city. And so that is the technical team. And again, all of this, the city pays for all of this, but we put it at the disposal of the folks who are on the next slide. This is our leadership committee that was pulled together to lead this discussion. And as I told them when we established this process, they are in the driver's seat. The keys are in their hands. They decide what we're going to do. They tell us what they want to do, and then the city will find a way to pay for it and make it happen. But the people that you see on here are longstanding and current and former elected officials, business leaders, nonprofit leaders. The other important thing about the folks that you see on this committee, there are people on this committee who detest one another, who would not be in a meeting with one another under any other circumstances. Several of them have run against each other for political office. but they are all united in their love for this community. And it was important to me that we had a broad diversity of viewpoints as to what ought to be accomplished in this area, people that represent a lot of different perspectives within the community, so that if they could find consensus, and they did, maybe a spoiler alert there, they can find consensus, then that is going to represent the consensus of the community. Next slide, please. So then our team, the community, the leadership committee, and the staff that were assigned to them by the city led this year-long public process. We had over 1,000 different people engage in charrettes, workshops, town hall meetings. We brought consultants in repeatedly to meet with them, to answer any questions that they would have, and to work through this process, again, with our goal being that the ultimate plan truly represented what the community wanted to see, and it does. We can move forward 2 slides, please. So first things first, they defined the vision for this space. And as you see it there, it's that this is the heartbeat of Greenwood in North Tulsa. It's a community that's thriving and built from the ground up with a strong foundation that emerged from our hearts, our people, and our heritage. We are the keepers and guardians of our culture as Black Tulsans, our legacy, and our community, connecting this generation to the next. So that is the vision that the leadership committee developed, which guides everything else. That then boiled down to their guiding principles, which are on the next slide. Guiding principles for what they wanted to see in this space were that it would be inclusive, innovative, rooted, inspirational, historic, healthy, connected, welcoming, and very importantly, resourced. And we'll get to that here in a moment. If we can move forward 2 slides. So this is this is a map of the area that we're talking about. And this is more what you would see on a standard map, with the north at the top. And so the key for us is that we focused our efforts largely on the land that the city has site control on, that the city owns, so that those participating in this process would know that we could follow through on the vision that they have for the site. So you can see here, downtown Tulsa is at the bottom of this. And then there were 3 primary sites that are publicly owned, and we can see a better aerial view of them on the next slide. So there's 3 different sites. The first one is just over 45 acres. This is the historic Kirkpatrick Heights neighborhood. This is the land the urban renewal land that is still sitting there almost entirely vacant, except for one Salvation Army facility. This is the largest contiguous piece of land that we had to work with. The second one, site 2, is a site that is of great importance to the community. You see that there's like a little carved out space there at the bottom left of that. That is the site of Vernon AME Church. Vernon AME Church is the only structure still standing today that was there before the race massacre occurred. It is of tremendous importance to our community. The site behind it, historically, it's a city flood control piece of land that has been used as a park, and it has just organically become a gathering point for festivals. Our Juneteenth festival is held there. It is a real community hub. And then the last one, site 3, is about 19 acres that runs north of this overall site for quite a ways, again on other land that is owned by the city. If we can move forward 2 slides. So the leadership committee developed, really renamed these 3 sites as the core, which is the big 45-acre site that I showed you. And they've developed plans for mixed use development that is a neighborhood with pedestrian friendly streets. The site behind Vernon AME Church, the gathering area, is called Greenwood Plaza. It's a community space that honors the culture and history of Greenwood. And then that long north to south park corridor is a stormwater park with active and passive spaces. Now I'm going to ask if we can, just for the sake of time, as we go through here, you're going to see quickly just the more detail. We don't have time today for me to go into detail on each of the spaces that folks have with you, but if we could move forward to item number 6. But you can see as we move there, just the level of detail that our consulting team put together for folks to see in this overall master plan. And if we could stop right there, that'd be great. So we took this out to the community. It was approved by the leadership committee. It was then submitted to our planning commission for their review. It was endorsed by them and then endorsed by the Tulsa City Council and is now the plan for us moving forward. So we wanted to be clear with folks as we were developing this, that this is not just a plan that is going to, we congratulate ourselves on developing a plan and then don't do anything. And so we set aside $2 million in our operating budget last year to begin the work on the Greenwood Plaza area. We have up for a vote on August 8th, the capital improvements program, which will also include funding for this project. Even before we've put out an RFP, there's a lot of public infrastructure that we know the city can fund to follow through on the vision that people have for this site. The other big issue I would say that has come up, and that we're upfront with folks, as you look here, you can see these are all next steps that we presented to the community as we're going around asking for their endorsement of this plan. We're also looking at ownership structures. So right now, most of this land is in the hands of the city, but we're looking at the idea of a community land trust so that the land truly is placed in the hands of the community. The benefits of anything that happens on that land are yielded by the community. This is a fairly new concept that, at least for us in Tulsa, that we're evaluating. And I'm really grateful. We've had a lot of help from outside national groups that have more experience in this than we do in evaluating what a community land trust might look like in Tulsa. So these are all our ongoing steps. And then if we could just move to the last slide, that's the overall goal for this. We want to take an area that for the last 100 years has been known as a site of pain and disgrace, and convert it into a site that represents the hopes, dreams, and aspirations, in particular of Black Tulsans, for Greenwood and Kirkpatrick Heights for the 21st century and moving forward. And we know that before we go out and ask any developer to partner with us in redeveloping this site, we needed to have this vision down thoroughly. And it took a lot more work, took a year on the front end, but we know that the end product will be better as a result. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mayor Bynum. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions about those specifics that you didn't have time to get into. So we'll have the opportunity to discuss a lot more about these efforts after our next presentation. Our next speaker is here. I'm going to introduce him, and then we'll take it away with his presentation and go into our discussion right afterwards. Gerardo Garcia is our next speaker. I'm going to go ahead and try to pin you here. There you are. Hi, Gerardo. He is the Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Planning and Development for the City of Chicago. He's an architect and urban designer who leads teams on subjects like community visioning, design guidelines, and infrastructure improvements. And today he's going to discuss the city's efforts to embed design excellence, civic engagement, and community wealth building into its RFPs, specifically through the Invest Southwest project that you may have heard about in the past. So welcome, Gerardo. Take it away.
Thank you, Grace. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining. And Mayor Bynum, good to see you again and be doing this again with you. Can everyone see my screen? Great. no, I don't want subtitles. So gonna walk everyone through today our kind of flagship program here at the Department of Planning on the south and west side of Chicago called Invest Southwest. And we titled this presentation Equitable Development, Inclusive Growth, because we're really at the core of our work asking ourselves two key questions, and that's, who is rebuilding Chicago and for whom? Oh, 1 second, guys, sorry. Okay, is everyone able to see that and see that full screen?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, great. So get right into it. For those of us who are familiar with Chicago or are lifelong residents of myself, when we think of our main streets on the north and south side of town, the image that you're seeing on the screen is really what comes to mind. And, we're talking about active retail, well-maintained and curated and landscaped public realm, places for seating, etc. And on the other hand, when we think about our south and west side main streets, this is what our commercial corridors mostly look like. And I think that the thing that I like to point out, particularly with these images, is the bones of good public realm are there, right? The white sidewalks, and you can tell the city has been investing in streetlights and kind of the things that are necessary to maintain a public realm. But the private realm, private development, hasn't necessarily followed suit. And so in that, we've seen an opportunity in our neighborhoods across the south and west sides, where we have miles and miles of square miles of historic building stock that serves to provide housing for our working class families, and particularly Black and brown families on the south and west side. And before we get into really the program and what it entails, I think it's important, and we always like to do this, is to kind of have a moment of reckoning of sorts and really understand how it is that we got here, why our commercial corridors look the way they do. And it's complex, but Chicago wasn't spared redlining as many of our cities across the city. And as you can see from this map, large swaths of the south and west side, the private sector basically determined which parts of those areas were worthy for investment, and often they were drawn along racial lines. And to compound that, we had urban renewal policies of mid-century, where folks are outside of these communities were determined what could be saved, what could be improved, and ultimately what should go. And what that left us was large swaths of vacancy and underdeveloped land. It also left us with a Chicago that is inequitable, right? And you can see on the pair of maps on the right side of your screen, our wealth disparities have worsened over the last 50, 60 years, where particularly our south and west sides have gotten poorer, while our kind of lakefront communities and our north side has gotten wealthier. And then when you juxtapose that against the last couple census, and you can see that Chicago has lost half its Black population in the last 20 years, that tells us and leads us to believe that, Chicago is basically losing or has been losing its Black middle class. And so now that we have that context, I want to talk about Invest Southwest again, which is the city's kind of flagship economic development initiative on the south and west sides of town. And we started by identifying 12 commercial corridors in 10 community areas. And the process for this was quite data driven, right? So we looked at data that obviously showed a demonstration of need, but also looked at the positive aspects and assets in each of these communities. So, where did we have concentration of business licenses? Where did we have access to transit, existing landmarks, existing historical assets, things of that nature, to hone down on these corridors? And I think, we have hundreds and hundreds of commercial corridors in Chicago, many of which are never going to see the type of activity that they once saw. So we were very strategic in terms of where could we start and where could we be successful as well. The next part of that is, I think it's worth acknowledging that as a city and as a Department of Planning, prior to our last administration, prior to the last 4 years, the Department of Planning wasn't an active presence in communities really across the city, but especially on the south and west sides of town. And so we embarked on a process of building trust. And you can see some of these images from our community kickoff events, which, of course, were pre-COVID and during the pandemic, we continue to have these regular engagements with our West Southwest communities virtually. The other thing that we did is that we reorganized our department and created planning regions so that each part of the city has a dedicated team of planners, urban designers, architects, landscape architects, et cetera, to serve those communities. And you can see our teams are small but mighty, but it's the first time in really decades that the city has had this kind of intentional presence across the city. And shameless plug, we are hiring. So if you know any talented urban professionals, feel free to send them our way, because we do intend to grow these teams both currently and in our upcoming budget requests. And so, how did we start this process? I think it's, worth kind of unpacking this slide a little bit because essentially when the previous administration came in to City Hall, they asked the alphabet soup of city organizations on the right hand of your screen to, document and compile all of the investments and infrastructure improvements that were targeted for these communities. And there was a process of looking at those, coordinating those, making sure that they were the right ones for the investment that we knew was coming along the way. And some of those were calibrated and et cetera. But really the premise here is that the city, if you look at the way that the city has been investing in resources over the last few decades, it's actually pretty equitable, right? I mean, the city has been providing services, sidewalk replacement, lighting, pretty evenly across the city for a long time. And as I mentioned earlier, the goal here was like, how do we use that investment that we're making and target it in a way that attracts private investment? So then we took that $500 million of planned, funded and infrastructure investments, again, with some tweaking and refinement, and found another $250 million in resources for new development and new projects, and set a goal of $250 million of additional private funding and private capital to these communities. And so, you can call it a $1 billion strategy, but that was the idea here. Let's take what we're already doing, add some more to it strategically, and let's see if we can catalyze some private investment. And in order to do that, we really needed to bring everyone together around this. So both the private sector, the philanthropic space, the nonprofit and public sector had to come together to work intentionally towards this goal. And one example is we reached out to several kind of well-known Black and brown developers in town and basically said, what's the list? Who are the players here? Who is actually ready to participate in these $30-40 million projects? And the punchline was that there weren't many folks that looked like the communities that we want to do work in that had the capacity to pull off these projects. So a coalition of a handful of developers created the Chicago Emerging Minority Developer Initiative. And the goal there was to provide capacity building and networking for emerging developers to then be ready to respond to these opportunities. Likewise, the Chicago Architecture Center, several philanthropic organizations all supported Invest Southwest in various ways, again, with this goal of driving equitable development on the south and west sides of town. Another way that we were supported is the Chicago Central Area Committee, which has historically been a very downtown-centric organization that in fact was formed in the 50s to address businesses leaving for the suburbs. How do we retain and keep businesses in downtown Chicago? And so they basically came to the city and said, how can we help? We see this fantastic initiative. We want to support you in any way possible. And it just so happens that their membership is composed of architecture design firms, real estate professionals, so on and so forth, and basically enlisted a series of teams. So for each community area, each commercial corridor, we released an RFP. So basically 12 teams led by designers and composed of everything from real estate brokers to contractors to help us not just envision what certain sites in these commercial corridors could be, but to actually help us put some reality to them and test the theory. You know, what's it going to take to build this? What's the financial gap? How much is the city going to have to support? And all of that data went into the RFPs. And what we found is that the design and development community responded in kind. What you see here on the screen now are a sampling of our RFP winners. So all, again, leading with design excellence, but also leading with a dose of reality of what each of these buildings were going to cost, what the expectation of city support was, because we set that out. We made that clear from the outset. And again, design excellence is very important for our department, not just because we like pretty things. And I don't know if anyone read Crane Chicago today, there was a not very favorable article about this program and the cost of development, and some of it attributed to design excellence. We don't believe that design excellence need to cost more, because as you look here, our philosophy and our priorities are really around principles. And so how do we use design to, for example, foster equitable development? How do we bring community into these conversations and sustainability? All things that should be happening anyway. And then in addition to that, we created a tool set for the development community. And what you see on the left is a cover to our neighborhood design guidelines. And so we knew that we were going to have this pipeline of development coming along. So in addition to rendering visible to developers exactly what we as a city and the community felt was appropriate, we also created a set of design guidelines that was very principle-based, meaning not prescriptive, to encourage developers to do things like create open and transparent ground floors, provide active uses on the ground floors, and so on and so forth. And the results, in addition to the architecture, we're very proud of in terms of developer capacity. So of all of the RFP responses, we had 33 teams respond. More than 60% of those were composed of disadvantaged business enterprises. And of course, we only selected 10, one per each corridor. But some of the images here you see here are the development teams and partnerships that were formed in order to make these RFPs a reality. And one of the concepts that we wrote into the RFPs was community wealth building. And so we want these teams to demonstrate to us how they are building ownership and wealth in the communities, and demonstrating that these projects are built by folks from the communities that look like folks from the communities, et cetera. And as a result, we have in our first RFP developments nearly $500 million in planned mixed-use development across each of the corridors. And you can see here a sampling of each of the communities and what those respective project budgets are. And we also have a pipeline of development. So we started with our 10 Invest Southwest RFPs. We are now up to 18 in the last 2 years of RFPs that we have released on the south and west sides of Chicago. Some of them Invest Southwest, most of them Invest Southwest, some of them not, as we've begun to kind of export the brand and the process to other communities. But in the meantime that these complicated and expensive projects come to light, we have to be able to show progress to these neighborhoods. And so using recovery fund dollars, our department essentially has funded this POP program. public open plazas and competitively set out these opportunities for communities to take underutilized vacant land and turn them into public open space. The other thing that we've done is on the lower right is, as some of these projects have begun construction or at least site prep, we've signaled to the community that something important and big is coming with some of this art fencing. And we talked about design and how it matters here, but I think the other thing that's important is providing these communities with the amenities that they need every day. Again, going back to the process of the formation for these visions, we had community visioning workshops. We had folks on our RFP teams that understood development, understood the economics of development, urban economists, et cetera, and understood retail trends, where retail wants to go. But one of the things that we heard clearly from each of the communities was like, we would shop here if we could, right? We would love to have a grocery, a sit-down restaurant, they're the top two in every community that we've done this work in. And so this concept of like the 15-minute neighborhood and being able to have everything you need within a short, reasonable walk from your home really began to influence how we formed and shaped these visions for communities. And as you can see, as we've targeted all of our different types of development incentives, small business programs, we've started to work towards creating these 15 minutes neighborhoods, with Bronzeville as an example, right? We've got a slew of mixed use development that's going to have ground floor retail while also supporting mixed use small business owners like the Bronzeville Winery, which is like Michelin rated now, 6-month wait list to get a reservation on the south side of Chicago. And we call this, an incremental approach towards development. So here you can see our commercial corridors are on Chicago Avenue in Austin and on Chicago Avenue in Humboldt Park, two different community areas. And in the center is JPSTC, which is the Joint Public Safety Training Campus, which was an investment that was initiated under 2 administrations ago. And it's what it sounds like, a $100 million state-of-the-art training facility for first responders. And so we have these 2 disjointed corridors. And in addition to our RFP sites, as you can see on each corridor, some of our intermediate activations, funding for streetscapes, we also had the opportunity to integrate the first built Boys and Girls Club in a generation onto the site of the Public Safety Training Campus, completely privately financed. All we did was award a 75-year lease to the Boys and Girls Club to basically co-locate with the Fire and Safety Training Campus. And so between both of these corridors, we're now seeing $100 million in targeted investment. And more importantly, we're signaling to private development, to everyone else, like, this is where the city is investing its money. Come be a part of this. And we're starting to see that happen on these corridors. And I'm wrapping up.
We're just about to run out of time and then head into the discussion, Gerardo. So I'll give you a minute to
Gotcha.
To take us home.
Yep, I'm almost done here. So one of the things that, and I'll gloss over this, but one of the things that we heard a lot from, particularly from emerging developers, is this notion that it's very expensive to put one of these proposals together. The pre-development dollars are the most expensive that any developer will ever incur. So we switched our model from a request for proposals to a request for qualifications. And by doing that, it allows teams to just submit their qualifications. We then went to the Chicago Community Trust, the philanthropic foundation, and they agreed to essentially provide $25,000 in architectural services to each of the selected teams from this pool of finalists. And the results we think are pretty impressive. So in Woodlawn, we had essentially Coney Neisenberg, John Ronan Architects, and Teeple Architects, Santa Monica, California, Chicago, and Canada competing to build a mixed-use project on the south side of Chicago. And the winner was Coney Neisenberg. In East Garfield Park, Brooke Scarpa LOHA, and Productora. So we had California again, and Mexico City with a local team as well. So starting to bring national and international design thought to affordable housing in Chicago. And I think one of the more proud moments in sifting through the comments in some of our local publications is, someone basically said, Chicago is affordable housing is giving market rate housing a run for its money. And that's exactly what we're trying to achieve here, is provide opportunities and resources for people through this lens of equity. So I'll leave us with that.